You know the symbol. You know the name. The Zodiac. The ghost who terrorized California, sent cryptic puzzles to the police, and then just vanished. For 50 years, the question has always been the same. Who was he? Well, what if I told you that's the wrong question? What if I told you the reason the most notorious cold case in American history is still cold is because the story we've all been told is a lie? I know, it sounds crazy, but think about it. The evidence has always been a mess of contradictions. You have eyewitnesses describing completely different men. You have a killer whose methods swing from a cold, efficient military-style shooting one night to a bizarre, ritualistic stabbing in a full-blown costume the next. And most importantly, you have the one suspect police ever publicly named, Arthur Leigh Allen, a man who fits the profile perfectly, yet is cleared by every single piece of major forensic evidence. The DNA, the fingerprints, the handwriting. None of it ever added up. Until now. The contradictions aren't mistakes. They're the entire point. The reason the puzzle seems impossible is because we've been trying to force the pieces of two different puzzles together. Today, we're going to lay out a new theory, one built on a chilling possibility the investigators overlooked, that the Zodiac wasn't one man. He was a team. And when you see how this diabolical partnership explains everything, the conflicting evidence, the different descriptions, all of it, you will never look at this case the same way again. A reign of terror. The attacks begin. To understand the theory, you first have to understand the chaos. The Zodiac's confirmed reign of terror was short, lasting less than a year, but it was brutally efficient and designed to create maximum fear. It all started on a cold winter night, on a lonely road that was anything but a lover's lane. December 20th, 1968, Lake Herman Road, Benicia. High school students David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, just 17 and 16 years old, were on their very first date. As they sat parked in their car, another vehicle pulled up alongside them. The driver didn't say a word. Instead, he fired several shots into the roof and back window of their car. Investigators believe these were warning shots, a cold, calculated move to force them out of the vehicle and gain control. Once they were outside, the attack was methodical. David Faraday was shot once in the head at close range with a .22 caliber pistol. Betty Lou Jensen tried to run for her life, but she was shot 5 times in the back. Police found 10.22 caliber Winchester Western Super X shell casings at the scene. This wasn't a messy crime of passion. It was a planned, pseudo-military style execution. And then, silence. For over 6 months, the killer disappeared. The killer re-emerged on the 4th of July weekend, 1969. Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Michael McGough, 19, were parked at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, just a few miles from the first crime scene. Another car pulled up, left, and then returned just minutes later, parking behind them. The driver approached their car, shined a bright light in their eyes to blind them, and then, again without speaking, opened fire with a 9mm Luger pistol, a significant escalation in firepower. After shooting them both, he started to walk away, but then heard Michael McGough groan in pain. So he came back and shot them both again. Darlene Ferrin died. But Michael McGough survived, and he gave police the first description of the attacker. A heavy-set white man, around 5'8", maybe 200 pounds, with a large face. But that wasn't the most important development. Just 40 minutes after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone. In a low, monotonous voice, he claimed responsibility not only for the attack that night, but also for the murders on Lake Herman Road, telling the dispatcher, "I also killed those kids last year." This was the moment the anonymous murderer transformed into a public performer. Killing was no longer enough. Now he needed credit. 2 months later, the Zodiac changed his tactics completely in what would become his most infamous and bizarre attack. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were having a picnic by Lake Berryessa when they were approached by a man in a terrifying, homemade costume. He wore an elaborate, executioner-style hood that covered his entire head, with a bib on his chest bearing that strange cross-circle symbol. This was not a swift blitz attack. It was a prolonged, ritualistic ordeal. Armed with a gun, he claimed to be an escaped convict who needed their car and money to flee to Mexico. He used pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline to bind their hands and feet. Then, the gun disappeared, and he pulled out a large knife. He stabbed Brian 6 times and Cecilia 10 times. Believing they were both dead, the killer walked over to Brian's car and, using a black pen, he left a scorecard on the door writing the dates of his previous attacks and adding "by knife" for his latest work. An hour later, he called the Napa County Sheriff's Office and reported a double murder. Brian Hartnell miraculously survived the attack, but Cecilia Shepard died from her injuries 2 days later. This attack revealed the true depth of the killer's sadistic fantasies. For his final confirmed murder, the killer displayed a new level of audacity, moving from isolated lovers' lanes to a wealthy San Francisco neighborhood. On October 11th, taxi driver Paul Stein was shot in the head with a 9mm pistol. But this time, the killer did something new. He took a trophy. After the murder, he took Stein's wallet and keys, and then tore off a large piece of his blood-soaked shirt. This trophy would allow him to relive the crime and, more importantly, prove his involvement in his next letter to the press. The investigation of this murder was famously botched. Teenagers across the street, who witnessed the aftermath, called the police, but the dispatcher mistakenly broadcast that the suspect was a black male. Because of that error, a responding officer, Don Falk, drove right past a white male walking away from the scene and didn't stop him. The Zodiac would later gloat about this near miss in a letter, which only reinforced his narcissistic belief that he was smarter than the police. 4 attacks, 5 dead, 2 survivors, and a killer who was now a media sensation, all in the span of 10 months. This is the Zodiac speaking. The mind games. As terrifying as the attacks were, the physical violence was only half of the story. For the Zodiac, the murders weren't the main event. They were the necessary spark. The real performance, the central theater of his terror, was the campaign of psychological warfare he waged through the mail. This is where he built his own legend. Starting on July 31st, 1969, the Zodiac began mailing more than 20 communications to Bay Area newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle. These letters were his primary weapon. To prove he was the real killer, he'd include details only the police could know, like the brand of ammunition he used or the exact number of shots fired. His persona was crystal clear, arrogant, taunting, and completely narcissistic, always signing off with his cross-circle symbol. The letters were filled with threats, including a notorious promise to shoot children on a school bus and detailed diagrams of bombs he claimed to have planted around the city. They were also packed with strange misspellings, writing paradise instead of paradise and Christmas. To this day, experts debate whether these were the genuine mistakes of a semi-literate author or a clever trick to mislead profilers. Either way, the message was clear. The murders were just his way of getting published, of forcing the entire Bay Area into a macabre dialogue with him. But letters weren't enough. To cement his image as a genius-level intellect, the Zodiac sent 4 cryptographic puzzles. The first, a 408-symbol cipher, known as the Z408, was sent in 3 parts to 3 different newspapers in July 1969. The FBI's best cryptanalysts got to work, but they weren't the ones who cracked it. It was solved in less than a week by a high school teacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife, Betty. Everyone held their breath, expecting the decoded message to reveal the killer's name. It didn't. Instead, it offered a chilling look into his motive. "I like killing people because it is so much fun," it read. "When I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves." It was a twisted philosophy, one he likely lifted directly from a 1924 short story called The Most Dangerous Game. His next major cipher, the Z340, mailed in November 1969, was far more complex. This one stumped everyone, the FBI, amateur sleuths, everyone for 51 years. It was finally cracked in December 2020 by a team of amateur codebreakers. And what did it say? It was just another taunt, dismissing a TV show and bragging that he wasn't afraid of being caught because he had enough slaves to work for me in the afterlife. 2 shorter ciphers, the Z13 and Z32, remain unsolved to this day. The Z13 begins with the tantalizing phrase, "My name is," but because they're so short, they are likely impossible to solve with any certainty, which may have been the killer's final, unanswerable taunt. These ciphers reveal a key truth about the Zodiac. While he had some knowledge of codes, the relative simplicity of his first one suggests he was more of a clever amateur than a master cryptographer. He wasn't necessarily a genius, but he was brilliant at creating the illusion of one, a performance that perfectly matched his campaign of psychological manipulation. The investigation and the great paradox. With the killer's persona plastered across every newspaper, the hunt for the Zodiac became one of the most extensive in American history. But it was a sprawling, fragmented effort. The Zodiac was clever, committing his crimes across different counties and jurisdictions, which made it incredibly difficult for police to share information effectively in the 1960s. This led to missed opportunities, like the infamous dispatch error that let the killer walk away free in Presidio Heights. The case itself is a complete paradox. It's flooded with evidence, yet almost none of it is conclusive. And that is the key to this whole mystery. Let's break down the evidence trail. First, ballistics. Investigators recovered .22 caliber shell casings from the first murder and 9mm casings from the second and fourth. Analysis confirmed that the same 9mm pistol was used to kill Darlene Ferrin and Paul Stein, definitively linking those two crimes. But the guns themselves? They were never found. Next, fingerprints. This was the most promising lead. Police lifted several partial bloody fingerprints from the inside of Paul Stein's taxicab. To this day, those prints have never been matched to any suspect. And finally, DNA. Decades later, in 2002, the San Francisco Police Lab managed to develop a partial DNA profile from saliva found on the stamp of a Zodiac letter. While it's an incomplete profile, it has been absolutely critical in excluding suspects. So you have shell casings with no gun, fingerprints with no owner, and partial DNA with no match. It was a trail of fragments. But that trail led investigators to one man, the only suspect ever publicly named by authorities. His name was Arthur Leigh Allen, a former school teacher and convicted sex offender. And the circumstantial case against him is so dense, it's hard to dismiss. Consider this. In 1971, a former friend of his, Donald Cheney, went to the police. He claimed that Allen had talked about his desire to kill people, to hunt them with a gun and a flashlight, and that Allen had specifically used the name Zodiac. The chilling part? This conversation happened months before the name Zodiac was ever made public. Allen also lived and worked in Vallejo, just minutes from one of the crime scenes. He even wore a Zodiac brand wristwatch, which featured the exact same cross-circle symbol the killer used. And here's the kicker. In 1991, decades after the attack, survivor Michael Mageau was shown a photo lineup. He pointed directly at Arthur Leigh Allen and said, "That's him. It's the man who shot me. Case closed, right? This has to be the guy." Wrong. This is the great paradox of the Zodiac case. For every piece of circumstantial evidence that convicts him, there is a hard piece of forensic evidence that exonerates him. That partial DNA profile from the stamp? It did not match Arthur Leigh Allen's D. Those bloody fingerprints from the taxicab? They did not match Arthur Leigh Allen's fingerprints. And the Zodiac's distinctive handwriting from all those letters? Multiple experts concluded that it did not match Arthur Leigh Allen's handwriting. This is the forensic wall. It creates the central conflict that has stumped everyone for 50 years. How can one person fit the profile so perfectly, be identified by a survivor, and yet be completely cleared by every single major piece of physical evidence? It seems impossible. But what if we've been asking the wrong question all along? A new theory, the architect and the operator. So, how can one man be a perfect match and a complete mismatch at the same time? The answer is, he can't. For decades, the investigation has been stuck on the assumption that the Zodiac was one person. But that single killer theory is riddled with so many contradictions it falls apart. The swift, impersonal shootings are hard to reconcile with the prolonged, ritualistic stabbing at Lake Berryessa. The eyewitness descriptions conflict with each other. And looming over it all is the Allen paradox, a mountain of circumstantial evidence blocked by a wall of contradictory forensics. The simplest explanation no longer works. We need a new model. And that model is a novel hypothesis that finally reconciles the contradictions. The Zodiac was not an individual, but a criminal partnership. This two-person model allows for a division of labor that aligns perfectly with all the disparate evidence. In this partnership, there were two distinct roles. First, you have the architect. This individual was the brains and the public voice of the Zodiac persona. He was the author of the taunting letters, the creator of the ciphers. His motivation was primarily intellectual and narcissistic, centered on playing a psychological game with the media and police. This person's DNA handwriting would be on the letters and stamps. Then you have the operator. This was the hands-on violence, the enforcer who carried out the physical attacks. He was the physically capable, stocky man seen by eyewitnesses. His motivation was rooted more directly in the act of domination and murder. His fingerprints would be the ones in the cab, and his physical presence would be at the crime scenes. This division of labor elegantly solves the case's central paradoxes. So, who fits these roles? Let's re-examine the suspects through this new lens. The operator is a near-perfect fit for Arthur Leigh Allen. This theory accepts the powerful circumstantial case against him as valid. The positive identification by survivor Michael Mago, his physical build, his history of anger, all of it points to him being a violent man directly involved in the attacks. He was the muscle, but who was the architect? The person writing the letters and leaving the clues that cleared Allen? The theory proposes a chilling and stunningly logical answer. Donald Chaney. Remember him? He was the star witness, the friend who told police that Allen had confessed key details to him. The name Zodiac, the desire to kill, the idea of taping a flashlight to a gun before they were ever made public. The traditional interpretation is that Allen confided in Chaney. But this new hypothesis proposes a chilling alternative. Chaney knew these details because he was the co-conspirator. He was the architect. Suddenly, everything clicks into place. This model explains Chaney's intimate, insider knowledge of the Zodiac persona. It honors the strong circumstantial case against Allen as the physical perpetrator. And most importantly, it finally explains why Allen's DNA handwriting did not match the evidence on the letters, because Chaney, the architect, was the one writing and mailing them. It even provides a motive for why Chaney eventually went to the police. A classic case of a conspirator turning on his partner to save himself once the investigation intensified. This Allen as operator, Chaney as architect model is the only framework that synthesizes the vast and contradictory evidence into a single coherent story. It transforms the Zodiac case from a story about one impossibly paradoxical killer into a more plausible, and perhaps more terrifying, story of a diabolical partnership. Conclusion: an enduring enigma. The Allen as operator, Chaney as architect model remains a hypothesis, but it is a powerful one. It's currently the only framework that manages to synthesize the vast and deeply contradictory body of evidence into a single, coherent criminological narrative. It takes a case famous for its impossibilities and makes it plausible. Of course, this theory has not been officially proven. Despite numerous claims and suspects over the years, the FBI maintains that the Zodiac case is still open and unsolved. The files remain active, a testament to the 5 lives cut short and the decades of fear this mystery created. Perhaps the real horror of the Zodiac case isn't the idea of a single, brilliant monster who is too clever to be caught. Perhaps the true terror lies in a story that is far more plausible, a story of a diabolical partnership, a story where the evil wasn't born from one impossibly paradoxical man, but from a bond between two who together unleashed a legend that still haunts us to this day. What do you think? Could the entire Zodiac mystery be the work of 2 people? Is the Allen Chaney hypothesis the answer we've been looking for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives that challenge the official story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.